Good morning and welcome to session 6 of our summer school, and we're going to be looking at the next 3 chapters of The Boy at the Back of the Class today. Okay, so in today's lesson we're going to be looking at picking out information from the text. This is one of the key GCSE skills that you will eventually need for year 11, where you've got to pick out information. So today's success criteria is that you can independently answer a range of different questions about the story that we've read so far. Okay, so before we read chapters 14 to 16, we're going to have a look at some vocab first, as usual. So the first word is mission. Mission is a noun, and a mission is an important job to do that you feel very strongly about and is very important for you to complete. So synonyms might be assignment, commission, journey, operation. So here's an example from the text. In the movies, people who go on a top secret mission always have lots of fun gadgets and maps and ropes, and sometimes even wear a cool hat. Appeal. Another noun, a special request for help which is meant to attract attention to a cause is an appeal. Synonyms, ask, request, plead or beg. And once the appeal went out, Ahmet's mum and dad would see it and get in touch. Justice. Another noun, justice is the upholding of what is fair and right and giving out what is deserved, whether that is reward or punishment. Synonyms are fairness, fair play, integrity, virtual, principle, morality. It is the High Court of Justice should be needing to write to. Anxiously. Okay, this is an adverb, so it's different to the other ones. It's an important word, anxiously, because what it means is when someone shows that they are worried, they are behaving anxiously. Okay, so if you're worried, you might be showing anxious behaviour. So some synonyms for anxiously are worriedly, apprehensively, fearfully, uneasily. Have you got a new envelope to put it in? And stamps, asked Tom anxiously. Reassuringly. Now we can see the ly there, which would tell us that this is another adverb. If you were trying to make someone feel better and more confident, you were acting reassuringly. Synonyms for that are encouragingly, comfortingly, supportively. It's okay, said Josie, reassuringly. Okay, so before I read chapters 14 to 16, go to your booklet and complete today's vocab task. Pause the video now. Chapter 14, the 3 plans. In the movies, people who go on a top secret mission always have lots of fun gadgets and maps and ropes, and sometimes even wear a cool hat. When you're 9 and over 3/4 though, and have to go to school every day, rescue missions are a lot harder, especially when you don't know where the people you want to rescue are, and you have to hide everything you're doing from the person you're going on the mission for. But even though we didn't have any gadgets or ropes or hats, we spent every break time and lunchtime and home time trying to think up new ideas that might help Ahmet find his family quickly. By Thursday morning, Tom and Josie and Michael had each come up with a plan, but I hadn't been able to think of anything. Don't worry, said Josie. You can help us see if our ones will work. I tried to smile, but it didn't make me feel any better. On the way to school, we went through all the plans. Tom went first. He said we should write to the Prime Minister to tell her to keep the gates open until Ahmet had found his family. He'd even gotten the address of the Prime Minister's house from his dad and written out the letter. This is what it looked like. Dear Prime Minister, we heard from some people on the bus that the government was going to lock the gates so that no more refugees could come in, but our friend Ahmet is a refugee boy. You might have heard about it because he's famous for beating up Brendan the bully, and he doesn't know where his mum and dad are and needs to find them. Please, Prime Minister, can you please keep the gates open so that we can find them and so that he can be happy again? Thank you. I thought it was a good idea, and so did Josie, but Michael said it wouldn't work because the Prime Minister was in charge of the government and had probably been the one who told the security guards to lock the gates and sent them special keys, so we couldn't ask her for any help at all. Then Josie talked about her plan, which was called the Special Appeal. She said we should ring a newspaper and tell them all about it, because her mum and dad were always complaining about how many special appeals there were for charities in their newspapers. And once the appeal went out, Ahmet's mum and dad would see it and get in touch. Josie had written the special appeal out and made it as short as possible so that the newspapers could print it quickly. This is what it looked like. Special appeal. Please everyone, a boy called Ahmet who was in Nelson School ran away from Syria because of bombs and lost his mum and dad. If you see a man and a woman who looks like this is their son or your Ahmet's mum and dad, please ring Mrs. Khan on the telephone number at our school, which is below. We need to find Ahmet's family before the gates are locked, which is why this appeal is so special. We all like the special appeal plan, but then Tom said that even if we did put the appeal in the newspaper would only be sold in England, and Ahmet's mum and dad and anyone who might have seen them would never see it. He knew because when he lived in America, he only saw American newspapers, and that was what it must be like in all the countries of our world too. Then Michael told us about his plan. We should write to the High Court, to the judge sitting in the highest chair in the land, and ask them to order all the security guards to open the gates when they see Ahmet's mum and dad. It's called an appeal too. I've heard my mum talking about them because her law firm are always doing them for people. I'd ask her how to help Ahmet, but she's always complaining about how much work she has to do, and she charges hundreds of pounds an hour. But we can't afford that, cried out Tom. I know, replied Michael, rolling his eyes, which is why I'm saying we should do the appeal ourselves. Is this an appeal like my newspaper one? Asked Josie. Sort of, except it's for a judge. All we need to do is find out who the highest judge in the land is and write to them, replied Michael. We could even send them your appeal, he said, giving Josie a nudge on the arm. We'd only need to change it a little bit. Mum's always saying that judges have nothing better to do than read appeals all the time. We were all excited about this idea the most, and as no one could think of anything else that might go wrong with it, we decided to go to the school library at home time to find out the name of the highest judge in the land. So, when the last bell rang, we told Ahmet we had to get home quickly so he wouldn't follow us and headed straight there. Our school library isn't as big as the one Mum works in, but it has larger windows and lots more sunlight, which means you can see the books better. Mrs. Finicky is our librarian. She always wears bright coloured clothes and bright red lipstick, and you don't even have to look for her because she's always standing behind the library counter. I like Mrs. Finicky because she always gets excited when you ask her anything. She tells people off for not looking after her books properly, just like Mum. She has a large sign on the counter that says, "Books are like people. Look past their cover and they'll take you on a great adventure." I like it because it's fun to imagine people as books and guess about what kind of adventure they might take you on. When we got to the library counter, we all looked up at Mrs. Finicky. She was wearing a sky blue top and a sky blue skirt, and Mrs. Finicky smiled and looked down at all of us and said, "Hello, and how can I help you today?" Tom and Josie and me looked over at Michael and waited, so we asked, "Miss, do you know where we can find out who the highest judge in the land is? We need to find out for homework." "Really?" said Mrs. Finicky, frowning. We all nodded, and Mrs. Finicky scratched her chin. "I think we'll have to look online for that," she said, and she started typing into her computer. We nodded and waited excitedly for an answer as Mrs. Finicky narrowed her eyes and looked at the screen. After a few seconds she said, "Here we go, right. Was it the name of the Lord Chief Justice you were after, or the High Court Judge for the Family Division?" We all looked at each other and then Michael said, "Family Division, please." Mrs. Finicky wrote the name out on a piece of paper. When she gave it to Michael, we all looked over his shoulder and read, "HC Family Division, Dame Leslie Williamson." "Anything else?" asked Mrs. Finicky. Josie said, "Does it have her address here, miss?" Mrs. Finicky frowned again. "Her address?" she asked. "You have to send her a letter as part of your homework." We all nodded. "So that it gets to her by tomorrow," I added. "It's the High Court of Justice you'll be needing to write to," said Mrs. Finicky, narrowing her eyes at the computer screen again as she copied it down. "But even if you post it today and it gets to her office tomorrow or on Saturday, remember that the courts are closed over the weekend. And it won't be the judge who gets the envelope. She'll have a secretary to open her mail for her." She handed the slip of paper with the address to Josie. "Anything else?" She looked at our downcast faces. "I'm sure she'll read your letter eventually," she added gently. "It might just take a while." We left and gathered out in the hallway outside. "What are we going to do now?" asked Josie. Her face was all pink, which is what happens when she's really upset. "Even if we send the judge the appeal right away, the gates will shut before she even gets it. It's already Thursday, and after this weekend is over, we'll only have 5 more days. We all looked at Michael, who shrugged and looked at the floor. "We've got to think of another idea," said Tom urgently. We all nodded, but I felt sick inside. I was scared that Ahmet's family wouldn't be found in time. We were all silent on the bus ride home that afternoon. Everyone was thinking hard, but I could tell from all our faces that none of us had come up with anything. I felt the worst, because at least everyone else had thought of something. I hadn't come up with a single plan. Now I know it was because my brain just wasn't ready to think of anything then. It wouldn't be ready until the weekend, but when it was, it came up with a plan so fantastic that nobody could say no to it. not even a judge sitting in the highest chair in the land. Chapter 15, the greatest idea in the world. That Thursday night when Mum was at work, instead of doing my homework, I took my Tintin pencil case and my exercise book and went and sat down by the window in the kitchen. I wanted to come up with a plan just like Tom and Josie and Michael had done, and thought that if I sat there, maybe my brain would come up with something exciting all on its own. I have a desk in my room, but I like sitting in the kitchen more because then I can see the sky and the whole city too. Tom says it doesn't matter how big or small a flat is, if it's on the top floor it becomes a penthouse. That's the kind of house that movie stars live in. I guess they must like sitting in kitchens and looking at skies and cities too. I waited a long time for my brain to think of something, but when Mum came home she found me still sitting at the kitchen table, pressing the Snowy and Captain Haddock buttons on my pencil case. I couldn't think of anything, not even after she came and sat with me to watch the sunset. I love watching the sunset with Mum. She calls it magic hour, because you can see colours you won't ever see again, and birds that might fly away forever, swimming across the skies together. But I can only ever do it properly with Mum. I've tried to watch the sunsets on my own and feel just as happy, but I can't seem to do it at all. It doesn't work. By dinner time, I still hadn't thought of anything, so I went straight to bed to see if my brain could think of other things better when I was lying down, but I fell asleep instead, and had a nightmare that was so scary it made me wake up. I dreamt of being on a piece of wood in the middle of the dark sea. At first it had been quiet, but then to my right a girl had begun to cry. She was about to be swallowed by a giant whale, and suddenly on my left my dad was shouting for help from a sinking boat. And no matter how hard I tried or how much I wanted to, I couldn't help the girl or stop my dad from disappearing into the water. If you've ever woken up after a nightmare, when it's pitch black and so late that nothing in the world is awake, you'll know it isn't nice at all. When I woke up, I couldn't hear anything or see anything, so for a moment I wasn't sure if I was awake or still in my nightmare, but then I heard one of the mice squeaking in the kitchen and I knew I was awake. That's a good thing about animals. They always let you know they're around, especially when they're hungry, and if they're around, then you know you're real and the world around you is real too. I was feeling hot and damp, so I got up and pulled back the covers to make sure I hadn't wet the bed. Luckily I hadn't. I hate wetting the bed. I used to do it all the time after Dad died, but then when I turned 7, something happened and I stopped doing it. Maybe when you turn 7, your body knows you've become too old to wet the bed anymore. I didn't want to lie back down in case I had the nightmare again, so I tiptoed into the kitchen to get a glass of water and to see the mice. Mum says that years ago, an old woman who bred all sorts of exotic animals used to live in our flat. That could be why we found a small nest of bright yellow snakes in our kitchen wall last summer, or why we have 2 mice living with us. But I don't mind. I like mice because they make good friends. For a tiny piece of food, they become your friends for life. They disappear if they don't like you, so you always know if they're going to be your friends right from the start, and it's always good to know from the start because it saves you from wasting your best cheese. So again, what's an interesting part about this novel being written from the perspective of the child is the child hasn't experienced this loss of innocence yet. As older readers, we know that Mum has made up this story about the old lady with the exotic animals because really they're living in poverty. Their flat isn't very nice, it's not in a nice area of London. You know, the snakes in the kitchen wall, the mice is all a sign of the poverty that they're living in, but the child is innocent and hasn't realised that, so Mum's done a really good job of covering that up. After I got a drink of water, I went back to my room, but I was still too scared to go back to sleep, so I sat on the floor and got one of my favourite Tintin comics out from underneath my bed. It was the one about the rich old opera singer who comes to stay with Captain Haddock, even though he really doesn't want her to, and whose green diamond gets stolen. I couldn't really concentrate on the story because all I could think about was Ahmet and his sister Sira being in the sea. But then, just as I was thinking about how the rich old opera singer looked like the Queen, except with a much bigger nose, it suddenly happened. I had it. An idea. And it was without a doubt, quite possibly, the greatest idea in the world. It leapt right into my head, just like a giant frog, and jumped around until I knew it had to work. It just had to. You can always tell when you've had a greatest idea in the world because it pops up from nowhere. Ordinary ideas take an awfully long time to become an idea because they're ordinary, so your brain can't get excited about them and has to make them slowly, like thousands of boring bread rolls being baked in an extra slow oven. But when an idea is truly great, it doesn't take any time at all. It just suddenly appears and makes your eyes go wide and your brain feel as if it's just been pushed out of bed. Jumping to my feet, I got out my exercise book and drew out my plan. This is what the greatest idea in the world looked like. When I had finished, I stared at it and went over it again and again in my head. I knew right away that it would work, but only if Tom and Josie and Michael helped and kept it all secret. I got back into bed and lay there, wishing for the morning to come, because as soon as it did, I was going to put the greatest idea in the world into action and help Ahmet find his family. I knew it was going to be the most exciting thing any of us had ever done, and that there was a chance it might get us into trouble too. What I didn't know was just how dangerous an adventure it was going to be, and quite how much trouble it was going to get us in. Chapter 16, The Royal Letter. It's brilliant. Genius. If it doesn't work, then nothing will. Michael, Tom and Josie all looked pretty impressed when I explained the greatest idea in the world to them on the bus to school the next day. Tom looked down at my diagram and eagerly pointed to the letter and pencil. This bit's easy, he said, but do you think she'll really get it? I nodded. She has to. It's the Royal Mail, so she has to get all her letters. It's the law. But she's the Queen. What if she's not home because she's somewhere else doing her duties and things and doesn't get it in time? Asked Michael. It's already Friday, remember? Michael was right. The greatest idea in the world would only work if the Queen was at home. She was always on the news, going to lots of places to collect flowers from people, and I hadn't thought about what we would do if she didn't get the letter at all. It's okay, said Josie reassuringly. If we post a letter today, then it'll get to her house by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow's only Saturday, and the gates don't close until next Friday. That gives us 6 whole days, so if she's not home, her butler will just open the letter instead, and he'll let her know that she needs to come home right away and talk to the special police and the Prime Minister. Yes, said Michael, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be brilliant, said Tom, as we jumped off the bus and walked to the school gates. There's no way she won't help us, not after she reads about Ahmet. But he mustn't find out, said Michael, tripping over his shoelaces, but too excited to stop and tie them up. Yeah, I nodded. He can't know, not until we're really sure that the Queen has found his parents. Don't worry, we can keep it a secret, and maybe if it does work, then we'll all get to meet the Queen, grinned Tom. I'll have to get more jelly if we do, he added, stiffening his hair with his fingers so that it was spikier than ever. Maybe we'll all get a medal for helping to keep the gates open, said Josie, kicking her football along, and Ahmet too for being so brave. Michael smiled. His smile always goes on one side when he's thinking about something that makes him really, really happy. It must be because he's so happy that his mouth doesn't know which way to go. Yeah, he nodded. One of those star-shaped medals, and if we did get one, we could pin it to our jumpers every day. Or, if it's on a ribbon, we could wear it around our necks, he said, touching the collar of his school jumper. I tried to imagine what it would be like to meet the Queen and to be given a star-shaped medal, but the thought made my mind go blank and I couldn't imagine anything at all. Sometimes the thought is so big that I can't squeeze all of itself into my head, no matter how hard I try, and the more I try, the more it makes my heart ache. Uncle Lenny says that's where headaches all come from, when you've tried to think too many thoughts or a giant thought tries to get in but it's too big to fit. He gets headaches all the time because he says when there's no one in the taxi with him, he doesn't have anything else to do but to drive around all night and think deep thoughts that light up his mind. Maybe that's why the front of his head is always so shiny. I didn't want to get a headache, so I left the thought of the star-shaped medal alone. All that day, whenever we knew Ahmet couldn't hear us, we talked about the greatest idea in the world and all the ways the Queen might help him and his family too. Ahmet caught us whispering together in the playground though, and looked at us in a confused way. What are you saying? He asked, looking at all of us. Nothing, said Michael nervously. We were just talking about homework, said Josie. Big homework, I added, quickly crossing my fingers behind my back. Your homework is small and easy, you see, and ours is big and lots more. Okay, Ahmet said slowly, but I didn't think he sounded like he believed us. After that, we all whispered an agreement not to speak about the plan until home time, which was when we planned to write the royal letter. But it seemed that the more excited we got about putting the greatest idea in the world into action, the longer it took for the day to pass, and that afternoon felt like the longest afternoon any of us had ever had. I kept looking up at the classroom clock to see if his hands moved, and I could see Tom and Michael and Josie doing the same thing. Then finally, just as we were about to give up hope of them ever reaching 3:15, the school bell rang for home time, and Mrs. Khan said, "Right, everyone, off you go. See you all on Monday." We all hurriedly waved bye to Ahmet, and instead of going with him to meet his foster mum like we usually did, we ran to the bus stop just as fast as we could. There's a wall behind the bus stop just long enough to fit 5 people. After we all sat down, Josie gave me a piece of yellow paper she had taken from her class tray and which was brand new, and Tom gave me his very best handwriting pen to use, and Michael gave me his workbook to lean on. He guessed we would have to miss 2 buses home, but it didn't matter, not when we were trying to write the most royal letter any of us had ever written before. Everyone said I should write it because I was the best at spelling. I was pretty nervous, but Tom and Josie and Michael all helped me choose what to say, so in the end it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. This is what the royal letter looked like. Your Royal Majesty of the United Queendom of England. Please, Mrs. Majesty, there is a new boy in our class called Ahmet, and he's a refugee boy from Syria, where there is a war and lots of bullies throwing bombs and hurting people. Ahmet had to get on a boat and walked a long way to come to our school, and had to leave his mum and dad behind in tents too. Ahmet needs to find them before the government closes all the gates. We thought because you own the country and the police and the Prime Minister has to listen to you, that you could please ask your special police and the Prime Minister to keep all the gates open and help Ahmet find his family. We know the gates will close on Friday, so this is an emergency. You can find us at Nelson Primary School, and Mrs. Khan is our teacher and Miss Hemsey is Ahmet's special teacher. Please let us know if you can help us as soon as you get this letter. Love from me, 9 3/4, Michael, 9 1/2, and Josie, 9 1/4. When we'd finished, Michael held it up to the light and gave us a nod. I don't really know why people like holding things up to the light, but I guess it's because they want to see through them and make sure they're okay. I was glad because even though my writing had gone wonky, everyone said it looked good. It was the longest letter I had ever written in one go, and my hand felt so sore, so I jumped off the wall and jiggled it about. In the distance, I could see the bus coming. Have you got a new envelope to put it in? And stamps, said Tom anxiously, as we got onto the bus. Yup, my mum's got loads, I said, and I'll post it by 5 o'clock from the postbox in the front of my flat. Don't forget to write special letter on the envelope in purple colouring pen. Purple's her favourite colour. And make sure the stamp says first on it, said Michael. When I got home that afternoon, while Mrs. Abbey was making me fish fingers for my tea, I quietly pulled open the big top drawer in the large chest standing in our living room. This drawer is called our Use Less Things drawer, because it's always full of things we have lots of but hardly ever use, like paper clips and spare staples and elastic bands and sellotape and bright yellow post-it notes and bits of blank paper. I found an envelope and carefully took out Mum's small wooden stamp box. Inside it are all the nearly new stamps that Mum's collected from letters she's been sent in the post. Most stamps are marked with something called a postmark, which means you can't use them again, but sometimes they aren't. When that happens, Mum claps her hands like it's Christmas morning, carefully peels the stamp away so that it looks just as brand new as possible, and puts it in her stamp box. I picked out 3 that had the nicest pictures with the colour purple in them and the first in the corner. I knew that most letters just had 1 stamp on them, but I thought 3 might make the letter get to the Queen faster, especially since there was a chance I might miss the 5 o'clock post. Trying to keep things a secret when there's a grown-up around always makes everything twice as long. I told Mrs. Abbey I was doing my homework early and coloured in lots of purple swirls on the front of the envelope, and then, just before I put the letter inside, I thought the Queen should know about Ahmet's sister and the sea, so I wrote, P.S. Ahmet had a little sister called Sira, but she died in the sea. So she needs to find his mum and dad even more, especially. Please keep this a secret. I knew what had happened to Ahmet's sister was a secret, but last year Mr. Thompson told us that the Queen has to keep state secrets, and if she can keep secrets about the state of everything, I knew she could keep Ahmet's secret safe for him too. Okay, today's independent activity. So you're going to answer some questions about the entire story so far. Do this as independently as possible. Remember to answer in full sentences with good handwriting and proper punctuation. Remember to use evidence from the text to support your answers. So pause the video now and head to your booklet. Okay, so here are some questions for you. What sort of the person is the narrator? Why did Ahmet have to leave his home? What does Josie look like? You might have to go back to the book to find that one. What did Mrs. Grimsley think about all the refugees? And what do you think is going to happen in the story now? What do you think is going to happen next? Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow for session 6.